Tonight, if you are looking for a place to let your mind rest, a pause from the whirlwind of thoughts spinning like the wind, then take a moment to stop here. Breathe in deeply, exhale slowly, and let this voice guide you through stories as light as mist and as warm as candlelight. Each story is a breath, a small step leading you back to the peace that has always lived in your heart. Whether you are lying down with your eyes closed or simply sitting in silence and listening, allow everything that still lingers to gently dissolve with each breath. And if these moments bring stillness to your heart, feel free to subscribe to this channel so that each night we can meet here again in this quiet space where sleep and joy bloom together like a lotus flower under the moonlight. And now, as your breathing steadies and your shoulders begin to feel lighter, we will step into these meditation stories. Not stories meant to teach anything, but simply to remind us that peace is already present in every single moment. Imagine yourself sitting beside a quiet river. The water is not rushing. The wind is not chasing. There is only the reflection of the moon and a few soft ripples. It is there that our first story begins, about a river that once forgot how to flow, and one day learned that even when standing still, it was still moving. That story is called The River That Forgot to Flow. Story 1. The River That Forgot to Flow. There once was a river that forgot how to move. For years, it had carried rain from the high mountains down to the valleys, singing to the stones and whispering to the reeds along its banks. But one summer, the sky forgot to cry. The wind grew dry, and the river slowly turned into a chain of shallow pools, then into mirrors of dust and memory. The fish were gone, the birds moved south, and even the sound of water, that soft heartbeat of the land, disappeared. The river lay still, like someone who had cried too long, and finally had no more tears to give. At first, it struggled. It tried to remember the feeling of movement, the weight of waves, the laughter of rain. I must flow, it thought. That is who I am. It waited for clouds to return, for thunder to shake open the heavens. But the sky stayed silent. The days passed, and the earth pressed closer around its bed, holding it like an embrace it didn't ask for. The river, once restless, began to listen to things it had never noticed before: the hum of the wind inside old reeds, the footsteps of deer crossing its dry belly, the faint echo of roots whispering below. Time stretched. The river, unable to move, began to dream. It dreamed of the mountains, where it was born from melting snow, of the way light once broke into thousands of silver shards when it ran fast over the rocks. But in the dream, there was something new. It saw itself not as a line of water, but as a long breath through the earth, as if even in stillness, it was still connecting everything: the trees, the soil, the clouds above. It woke one dawn to the faint sound of dew sliding from leaf to leaf, and realized it was weeping again, not in sorrow, but in gratitude. When the first rain finally came, it did not rush to move. It let each drop sink into the cracks, feel the dust soak into the roots that had kept it company all this time. The water gathered slowly, shyly, like a child remembering the shape of home. When it finally began to flow again, its song was softer than before, more tender, as if it carried within it the silence it had once learned to love. And from that day on, the river no longer feared being still. It knew that even when it stopped moving, life was still moving through it. The sky, the soil, the wind, all were flowing in their own way. All were teaching it that peace is not the absence of motion, but the presence of trust. So if tonight your thoughts feel like dry stones, if your heart feels too heavy to move, remember the river. You don't need to rush to become whole again. Just rest, breathe, and let the quiet seep back into you. Sometimes, even forgetting how to flow is part of learning how to begin again. Story 2: The Monk and the Empty Teacup. In a hill town where the fog came early and left late, there was a small monastery with cedar eaves and a bell that sounded like a low breath. Travelers sometimes climbed the narrow path to rest in its courtyard and sip warm tea, especially on evenings when the clouds lay so close to the ground you could almost fold them like blankets. In that monastery lived an old monk whose robe had been patched many times by patient hands, and whose smile seemed to belong to a long, kind winter. He rose before dawn, warmed the kettle, swept the steps, and watched the slow birth of light along the ridge. People said he knew many teachings, but when asked for them, he often laughed and spoke of weather of sparrows, of the way moss remembers shade. He believed that wisdom was not an object one could take, but a scent that clung to the air when you stopped moving. One autumn day, a young man arrived, boots muddy, mind louder than his footsteps. He was the kind of person who had read a great deal and slept very little, who kept a private ledger of goals and timelines and hoped to outpace everything that frightened him. He had filled journals with notes and underlined them, twice had highlighted the margins of his life in neon so he would not miss a lesson. But the more he learned, the more he felt a pressure at the back of his eyes, as if understanding demanded a tax he could not keep paying. He bowed at the gate and asked to see the old monk who was rinsing teacups by the kitchen window, watching rinsed light slide off porcelain like quiet rain. "I've come to learn calm," the young man said. "I've come to learn how not to drown in my thoughts." He spoke quickly, as if every second that passed unfilled might become a debt. The monk nodded and gestured to a low table by the open door, where the fog made a white curtain just beyond the threshold. He put 2 cups on a tray, sat, and lifted the kettle. The steam rose in a loose ribbon, winding itself around the smell of cedar and boiled leaves. "Tell me what you know," the monk said. The young man inhaled, and knowledge came spilling out like corn shaken from a bag. Sutras and sayings, commentaries, and counter-arguments, names of teachers, methods of breath, ways of sitting, the difference between attention and awareness, how to scare off a panic by counting walls, how to soften the jaw so the heart would loosen too. He spoke of his failures and successes, of the nights he stayed awake, listening to his pulse climb a ladder he could not see, of his fear that beneath all this effort there was a storm that would never end. While he spoke, the monk poured tea. The first cup filled halfway. The second cup kept filling. The young man did not notice until the tea reached the lip and carried on melting over the porcelain's edge, making a thin river across the table to the monk's fingers. The monk did not flinch. Tea pooled in the groove between boards, found a knot, circled it like a small planet. The young man leapt to his feet, searching for a cloth, a towel, anything to rescue the ceremony he had accidentally drowned. The monk set the kettle down and finally made a little sound, not surprise or reproach, but something like the end of a hum. "Master, I'm sorry," the young man said, though he had not been the one holding the kettle. "I didn't mean to." The monk lifted a hand and smiled. "If a cup is full," he said, "even the finest tea has no place to rest." He tilted the cup slightly, and the last of the overflow fell into the tray with a soft kiss. "You want calm," he continued, "but you keep pouring more wanting into the cup. You want sleep, and so you chase it through the house. Sleep hides from chasers." The fog stirred at the door, as if it were breathing with them. The young man sat again, feeling a heat in his cheeks. Not from tea, but from the recognition that he had traveled far to be told something simple, something too easy to be credible, and therefore too difficult to practice. The monk held out a cloth. Together, they wiped the table slow, as if polishing a memory. When the wood was dry, the monk refilled both cups, this time stopping shy of the rim, letting a thin crescent of space remain for the tea to breathe. "Drink," the monk said. The tea was not extraordinary. Or it was, but in a way that lasted only as long as the heat lasted. It tasted like the color of the room, like the fog taking off its shoes. The young man felt the first swallow travel down his chest and come to rest where worry liked to build a room. For a moment, the room had no walls. He inhaled, exhaled, and remembered that his body was not just the headquarters of his mind, but also the home of his breath. It occurred to him that perhaps he had treated breathing like punctuation, mere commas between ideas, when in fact it was the sentence itself. "Master," he said after a while, "how do I empty the cup without discarding everything I've learned?" He glanced at the books in his bag as if they might take offense. "How do I let go without throwing away?" The monk considered this, or pretended to. Perhaps he had known the answer all his life and was simply making time for the young man to arrive at it too. "When a musician rests," he said, "she does not throw her instrument into the river. She places it back in its case. The silence is not against the song. It is part of the song. When you rest your learning, you do not break it. You set it gently on the table and invite the next moment to sit down." He leaned forward slightly. "Emptying is not erasing. Emptying is making room." A bird landed on the windowsill and shook rain off its wings, though the day was dry. Perhaps it had flown through a cloud or kept a small storm in its feathers. The young man watched it hop, then lift away. In his chest, something gave a quiet click, like a lock aligning. He did not become enlightened, because that seemed like a dramatic word for what was happening. He merely became less crowded. He could feel how many chairs he had arranged in the narrow room of himself, how many guests he had invited, and asked to speak at once. Fear, ambition, duty, regret, hope, control, the ghost of control, the friend of the ghost. He saw the room without all those chairs. There would be space for a window, for the kind of light that does not try to prove anything. The monk poured more tea, then left the kettle. "You told me you drown in your thoughts," he said. "Show me the river." The young man blinked, not understanding. "Show me the river?" The monk repeated, "the one that carries you away. Put it on the table. Let us pour tea into it." "I can't," the young man said. "It's not a thing. It's a..." He searched for a word and found a handful. None of them fit like a shirt. "It's a feeling. It's a storm. It's everywhere when it comes. The monk nodded. Then where is it now? The young man listened. In the pause, something sweet the kettle had carried from the leaves drifted across the table. I don't know, he said. I suppose it isn't here. Not exactly here. He looked at the teacup half full, and the space above it that made the cup a cup instead of a stone. Maybe I'm the one who brings the river with me when I think of it. Maybe I unfold it from my pocket. Then fold it back, the monk said quietly. Let the pocket be empty for a while. Learn the weight of nothing. He lifted his cup. When you sleep, don't try to sleep. Sit with the night the way you sit with tea. Let it warm your hands first. Let it tell you where to put the cup down. The young man stayed in the monastery that night. There were no grand lessons, no ceremonies where bells made declarations about the nature of reality. After dinner, he helped wash bowls, feeling the different temperatures of water as if they were weather passing through his fingers. He swept the hall, listening to the bristles speak with the floor. He lay down on a thin mattress and stared at the beams of the ceiling, which were darker than the rest of the wood, and therefore seemed deeper, as if sky had been tucked into them. He waited for his mind to assemble its usual parade, to set up music and banners and arguments, to audition a cast of worries for the lead role. But the parade arrived late and left early. Between those two moments, he fell asleep, not because he had chased sleep, but because he had accidentally stopped chasing anything. In the morning, mist stitched the pines together and made them look like one soft animal. The bell sounded without hurry. The young man woke with the memory of having dropped something heavy into a lake and hearing no splash, only a widening circle of quiet. He rose and followed the smell of hot water to the kitchen. The monk was already there, and the kettle was already singing. Without speaking, the young man took 2 cups from the shelf. The monk watched him, set them down, watched him lift the kettle, watched him pour, and then stop, leaving a thin silver of room at the rim. The young man looked up, as if asking whether the room was enough. The monk's eyes warmed, and he nodded. They drank. It was the same tea as yesterday, and also different, which is what happens when nothing changes, and you do. The young man felt an ordinary happiness that had no reason beyond the fact of mourning. He thought of his life below the hill, the emails like birds pecking at the window, the metrics that promised meaning. If he fed them enough hours, the habits that had become houses where anxiety lived, rent-free. He did not know how those things would look from now on. He only knew that the cup could carry less and still be enough. Before he left, he asked the monk for one teaching he could take with him, something small enough to tuck into a day that would not always be gentle. The monk searched the room as if the right word might be hiding behind the kettle or under the tray. He lifted his finger and drew a circle on the table where the tea had pooled yesterday. "Remember this space," he said. "Leave it in your breath, in your schedule, in your heart. When you are full, you are fragile. When you are spacious, you can hold the world and not spill." The young man bowed. On the path down, the fog thinned until the town below showed its modest geometry, roofs like folded hands, streets like strings tying the morning together. He walked slowly, not because his pack was heavy, but because the air was doing the work he used to do, carrying the day forward one step at a time. He passed a bakery, just opening the smell of bread, making all thoughts briefly holy. He passed a woman, sweeping her porch, the broom drawing neat lines in the dust, rehearsing the shape of ease. He passed his own reflection in a dim shop window and did not pause to evaluate it. The cup inside him was not empty or full. It was exactly what it needed to be ready. That night, back in his small apartment, he boiled water without hurrying it. He shut off the extra lights so the room could remember how to be evening. He placed a cup on the table and poured, stopping just before the rim. He sat hands around porcelain and listened for the river he sometimes carried in his pocket. It was there if he wanted it. He did not want it. Through the thin walls, a neighbor's radio drifted in and out, like someone practicing how to disappear. The young man breathed. He did not try to sleep. He did not try to be calm. He simply made room. And in that room, quiet as steam, the night placed something warm. He lifted it to his lips and drank. Story 3. The bird that slept on a cloud. There was once a small bird with dusk-colored feathers and a pale ring around one eye, as if someone had gently pressed a thumbprint of light there. It lived on a wind-washed coast where the cliffs tasted of salt and the grass bent in one direction for most of the year. The bird had learned early to ride the long breath of the sea, to let the air carry it the way a lullaby carries a child. But this year, the winds were wild in a different way. Storms arrived with too many shoulders. The air was full of voices that did not sing so much as insist, and the bird's wings, though faithful, grew tired. In places, wings do not usually admit to. It flew farther than it meant to. It turned back later than it should. It listened to maps the way anxious travelers listen to clocks measuring distance in how much they still feared they had not done. On the evening the story truly begins, the bird found itself alone above a gray field, quilted with stubble and small stones that refused to be forgotten. A thin rain was trying to remember how to be a river. Dusk, generous and unhurried, was laying a hand on the day. The bird's wings ached in a way that made the rest of the sky feel heavier than it should have. It dipped once, twice, looking for a tree with the right kind of thinking. Not too many branches, not too few, something that could cradle the night without making it feel like a cage. But the field was treeless, and the wind, with its pocket full of suggestions, kept tugging the bird toward more sky. The bird climbed just enough to see the horizon surrender its last line of gold. There, a small cloud, late for whatever gathering clouds attend, loitered above the field, as if unsure whether to keep moving or stop and apologize. It was not a grand cloud. It was simply itself, a handful of breath someone had forgotten to put away. The bird veered toward it, because sometimes the body knows before the mind agrees. Sometimes the soul nods its head without waiting for permission. The cloud was cooler than air and softer than any idea. The bird hovered uncertain of the etiquette of such a place. Where on a cloud does one land? Where is the branch? Where is the edge? Anywhere the cloud might have said, if clouds said such things. The bird let its claws touch the light, and then, in the way that happens when trust is borrowed from something larger than understanding, the bird settled. The cloud dipped a little, then steadied. The bird folded its wings and listened for complaint, as if night might object to so obvious a kindness. Nothing objected. The rain gave up its career for the evening and fell asleep where it was. The wind remembered a lullaby it had not sung since childhood. The bird closed the eye with the pale ring first, then the other, not expecting sleep, so much as a brief truce with wakefulness. It is said by those who say things that are gentle and therefore often true, that sleeping on a cloud erases the border between the dreamer and the world. The bird did not fall into sleep the way a stone falls into water. It walked into it the way one walks into a candlelit room where friends are waiting and no one expects you to perform. The clouds cool, soaked into the bones that had been talking all day. The ache turned into a story about a river that once forgot to move and then remembered by loving its stillness. The sky wrapped its coat around both bird and cloud, and darkness, never in a hurry, finished the job of being night. In the soft geography of sleep, the the bird dreamed of its first flight. In the dream, it was not smaller. It was simply new to the idea of air. A parent had pushed, and then not pushed, teaching the most honest lesson about love that it carries you, as long as it can, and then steps aside so your own wings can hear your own name. The bird dreamed of a shoreline that did not end, of grains of sand that had once been mountains, of how everything that seems to disappear is only traveling, how even the smallest pebble holds the memory of a cathedral in the patient language of time. It dreamed of rain seen from underneath the quiet stitching of drops into the lake's blue garment, and of sunlight tearing that garment open again until both light and water were laughing. Toward midnight, the bird woke and did not move. Waking on a cloud is like waking in a promise. The world below had become a dark quilt, and in the distance, a town breathed its small lamps into the air. The bird listened. There were no predators in listening. There was only the chance to hear one's own heartbeat arriving home. The cloud shifted in a way that suggested comfort rather than instability. The bird felt something it struggled to name. Not safety, which is a word with fences. Not victory, which is a word with flags. Something more like belonging, but without the attendance list. Perhaps the word was ease. Perhaps the word was here. Through a corridor of wind, a memory wandered in a winter morning at the edge of a frozen pond where reeds wore coats of glass, and even the sun seemed to be walking on tiptoe. The bird had hopped on the snow and left a message it did not know how to read. A child carrying a red scarf and a plastic sled had stopped to look at the pattern. She had smiled in that way. Children sometimes smile when they recognize art has happened without permission. She had traced the footprints with her finger in the air, as if writing the word hello, where only breath could see. The bird had lifted into a sky the color of a soft question, feeling that somehow the world, which could be difficult in the daylight, had in that moment declared a truce. The cloud sighed. Clouds do but quietly, and the bird felt the night lean in. The ache that had traveled all day with the bird had become a quieter companion, like a friend who understands that not every silence needs a chair pulled out for it. The bird thought of nests it had made and abandoned, and made again, of the way home keeps changing costumes, pretending to be places until it grows brave enough to show itself as a rhythm. What if home is not a location, but a cadence? What if shelter is the way breath remembers to come back after leaving? Below, a fox moved along the hedgerow with the grace of someone who has forgiven the world for requiring caution. Far away, a train rehearsed the future for those who still believed arrival would finish the sentence. Closer to the field, an owl folded the night into its wings and unfolded it again, as if explaining darkness to anyone willing to learn. The bird, awake but not worried, let these sounds pass through it, like a choir of gentle accountants counting what mattered and throwing away all the coins. When sleep returned, it came with a dream, different in texture. The bird found itself in a warm room with wooden beams, walls the color of honey, and a window the size of mercy. In the room, a kettle talked to itself about water and a person. Age not important kindness. Obvious, poured tea into 2 cups, stopping just before the rim. The person looked up, as if expecting someone else to be there, and when no one arrived, they smiled anyway, as if absence were merely a different kind of presence. The bird, being a bird, could not drink tea in the human way, and yet the aroma reached into its chest where tiredness had been stacking chairs. The chairs unstacked themselves. The dream seemed to say, "You do not need to fill the room for it to be a room. You do not need to fill the heart for it to be a heart." Toward dawn, the cloud began to thin in the way clouds do when morning letters arrive from the sun. The bird felt the change before it could see it. The air warmed, but lightly. The world below adjusted its posture. Fields turned from black to charcoal to a green that had been practicing all night in the wings. The bird stood, not because it had to leave, but because departure and arrival were 2 words for the same door, and shook its feathers in the measured, dignified way of creatures who trust the architecture of their own bodies. A few droplets fell from the tips of its flight feathers, tiny bells rung by no hand. If this were the kind of story that needed moral engineers, someone would say, the bird learned that rest is not the opposite of flight, that stillness is not the failure of motion, but its counselor. But the story prefers the less industrious verb the bird remembered. It remembered the rule of wings, which is that they are not built for constant proof. It remembered that the sky does not require excuses for pausing any more than the sea requires reasons to rise and fall. It remembered that what heals is not always added. Often, it is subtracted a chord, less a chore, less a voice, less, until the melody of being is heard again. The bird left the cloud as the sun laced the horizon with threads of apricot and milk. The cloud lighter now drifted east to attend to other small salvations. The bird did not rush. It drew a long line through the morning that was indistinguishable from ease. It flew low enough to see a farmhouse where smoke braided itself out of a chimney, and a woman half awake opened a door to feed a cat whose entire religion was breakfast. It flew high enough to meet the day on terms that made sense to wings. It made for the coast by a path that felt like a sentence without unnecessary adjectives. The cliffs appeared wearing their old faces. The sea, never offended by time, laid a blue hand on the rock, as if checking for fever. When the bird reached the familiar ledge, where it liked to pause and inventory the weather, it did not take stock of miles, or scold the horizon for being so convincingly endless. It stood and let the salt write its soft arithmetic on the air. A question arrived. Where will you sleep tonight? The bird answered, without words, where the breath is kind. Sometimes that would be a branch, sometimes a boat's rope, sometimes the shoulder of a statue whose stone pigeons were better listeners than most. And sometimes, when both luck and need agreed to share a table, it would be a cloud. That evening, the wind returned to its earlier habit of helping. The bird rode it the way a thought rides a violin, not to perform, but to be carried. It traced the edges of a cove, and then the geometry of a small town where laundry lines sang very softly. A boy watered marigolds that did not require water, but appreciated the attention. A baker slid loaves into a mouth of heat that smelled like tomorrow. The bird watched these things with the old, tender curiosity all living creatures share. What is it like to be you? What is it like to breathe that way? It did not expect answers. It took the questions with it, like round pebbles kept in a pocket for the pleasantness of wait. Night came again, as it does not as an ending, but as a broader kind of seeing. The bird did not look for the same cloud. It had learned that repetition is not devotion. Still, when it saw a small traveler of vapor adrift above the harbor, the bird recognized not the cloud, but the permission. It alighted for a moment, only a moment, to test the fabric of the air. The cloud yielded like a friend making space on a crowded bench. The bird smiled, insofar as birds smile a relaxation around the eyes, a deeper agreement at the center of the chest. Then it lifted, because flight was not the opposite of rest anymore. It was one more way of being gently held. Later, when the bird finally chose a branch, a good one with opinions, but not arguments, it tucked its head into the soft alcove between wing and body and listened to the tide unbutton the shore. Sleep arrived without ambition. Before it closed the door behind itself, sleep left a note. Remember, you carry the quiet with you. The cloud was only showing you where to find it. In the mornings that followed, the bird flew differently. Not slower, not faster, but truer, as if a metronome had been removed and a heartbeat restored. It did not police the sky for purposes. It did not interrogate the map for justifications. It followed the weather the way one follows a good story, trusting that what needs telling will be told. When tiredness came, the bird did not accuse it of betrayal. It offered it a chair, a cup of water, a window with the right kind of light. The world, seeing this kindness, grew kinder in return. Or perhaps it had always been this kind, and the bird had only now learned the language. If you listening under your own kind of sky, feel your mind beating its wings against a glass, you cannot see if you find the branch too far or the night too large. Think of the small bird and the small cloud and the agreement the two of them made without paper or pen. Think of how sleep can be a place without walls, how rest does not require proof, how breath can be the boat that takes you across. You do not have to find that exact cloud. You only have to look for what it taught that you carry a softness capable of holding you, that you are allowed to put down the day without apologizing to tomorrow, that you can rise in joy, not because you conquered night, but because you made friends with it. And when you wake, whether soon or after a long, deep drift, may your wings remember with gratitude, not burden. May the air lean toward you like a patient teacher. May your first thought be a quiet smile that doesn't need a reason. The cloud will move on. It has other pilgrims to hold. But the lesson remains lighter than air and stronger than stone. You can sleep in peace and rise in joy, because the sky you travel is also traveling in you. And the place you rest is not a location, but a way of listening. Story 4: The Candle and the Wind. In a small temple by the edge of a marsh, where reeds whispered to each other like old friends, and frogs tuned the night with patient throats, there lived a candle who knew herself by the way she made darkness softer. She stood each evening on a low wooden altar in a holder of brass, rubbed smooth by many careful hands. When a monk lit her with a match struck against a stone, she felt the flare kiss her wick and become a steady breath. The room brightened just enough to reveal the grain of the floorboards, the curve of a teacup, the quiet geometry of prayer. Beads coiled like a question, waiting for a gentle answer. People came and sat cross-legged, and the candle watched their shadows open like flowers on the wall. The candle's life was simple and sweet, but behind the sweetness, there lived a thin thread of fear. Across the room, the shoji door had a habit of breathing. On evenings, when the marsh sighed a little harder, the door would lift at the edges, and the wind would slip inside a cold traveler with fast hands. The candle had seen what wind could do when it grew restless. She remembered a night years ago, before she was placed on the brass holder, when a gust ran through a street and caused a row of market candles to bow out all at once, their smoke rising like a choir of pale snakes. She did not forget the sudden emptiness that followed, the way faces became unstitched from kindness when light went missing. So each night, even as she offered herself, she watched the door. One evening, the monk who tended the altar slid open the shoji to invite the night to sit closer. The wind entered like a polite stranger. Cool palms held behind its back, unsure whether to speak. The candle felt her flame lean, then stand, then lean again, the way a person does in a crowd, adjusting to the rhythm of others. Around the room, heads bowed. The monk's chant threaded itself through the air like a low river. The wind moved among the syllables, reading them with its fingertips. The candle lowered herself, then rose, learning a dance she had not consented to. "Please," she whispered, "without a mouth, be kind." The wind, if it heard, did not answer in words. It answered by not hurrying. After the service, when the room had emptied, and the monk had put away the cushions, the candle still burned. The wind remained curious in the doorway, arranging the smell of water and pine. The monk poured tea and set a cup near the brass holder so that the candle could smell the faint green sweetness. "You are brave," the monk said softly, speaking to no one and to everything. "But you are also more than your fear." The candle listened. She knew fear as a kind of shadow shaped like the future. She also knew warmth. Between the two, a conversation began that had no need for winning. Days passed. Moons slid their bracelets around the sky, and the candle learned the temper of different winds. There was the shy wind that forgot its own name at the threshold. There was the petty wind that liked to tug at sleeves. There was the storm wind that arrived like an orchestra, late to the concert, loud and apologetic. For each, the candle adjusted, standing tall for the shy, widening her glow for the petty, so it lost interest, and lowering herself for the storm, the way tall grass does, understanding that grace is sometimes the art of not resisting. One afternoon, a child came with her grandmother to place a small folded paper crane at the altar. The candle, unlit in the late daylight, watched the child study the room with the seriousness that children grant to things adults have forgotten how to see. The child pointed to the brass holder. "Is it hard?" She asked to be fire and not be afraid of wind. The grandmother smiled and let the question float. The monk, passing with a broom, paused. "Fire and wind are cousins," he said. "They argue, but mostly they teach each other how to bow." The child nodded as if told a secret about stars. She touched the paper crane to the base of the holder so the candle could feel the cool edge and the warmth of a small human intention. That night, the wind returned with more certainty. The marsh was restless. Reeds scratched lines on the moon. The shoji slid on its track and left space. The candle was lit. Flame rose and made its small agreement with air. The wind approached. The candle steadied, remembering how to breathe a thin, clear breath that did not try to climb taller than it needed. As the service began, a thought came to the candle like a hand on her shoulder. What if the wind is not here to end me, but to remind me how I am held? She let her flame lean without panicking, like a dancer, aware of both the step and the floor beneath the step. She noticed how the room, even while moving, kept her. Walls and wood and human attention formed a kind of harbor. Halfway through the chant, the wind did something it had never done before. It spoke in the language of smell. It carried the marsh at night, mud opening its cool drawers, water remembering, distant rain crushed mint from a hidden path. The candle inhaled as much as a flame can. For a moment, the fear that had always waited behind her, light, loosened like a gnaw pulled by patient fingers. She realized what the monk had meant by more than your fear. Her purpose was not to defy wind, it was to offer seeing. If the wind made the seeing flicker, then the seeing could learn to include flicker. Later, when the room emptied again, the candle's flame had shortened, but grown clearer, the way an old truth sounds, more honest when spoken softly. The monk approached and set his hands near her warmth without touching. In darkness, he said, "Light remembers itself. In wind, light remembers the shape of its body." He blew gently, not to extinguish, but to play, and watched the flame boil and return. There, he whispered, pleased, for no grand reason at all. The candle began to attend to a deeper geography. She noticed how each person who entered brought their own weather, a woman carrying a storm tucked into her shoulders, a man wearing a drought in his eyes, a teenager who held sunrise in his restless hands. When they sat, their weather slowly listened to the room, to the wood, to the chant, to the patient coin of light being spent 1 second at a time. Sometimes the wind helped cooling hot thoughts, combing tangled breath. Sometimes it complicated things, asking people to consider how easily we mistake disturbance for danger. Either way, the candle continued a small, faithful gold set against the large and moving night. One evening, the storm wind arrived, full-voiced, bringing the smell of distant lightning and the sound of the marsh lifting its skirts. The shoji rattled like teeth in a river. The candle's fear rose from old memory and stood beside her like a guest without an invitation. "I know you," she thought. "You tell me stories about endings." The storm pushed in, eager to press its fingers everywhere at once. The monk looked toward the door, judged the night, and left it slightly open, not out of negligence, but because he trusted the room to hold what entered. He lit a second candle and placed it far across the hall. 2 lights. 2 small boats on a dark lake, recognizing each other by the way they made reflections possible. The chant began. The wind rushed, tugged, whirled. The first candle bent so low, the brass warmed at its own base. Smoke sketched a question mark above the wick, then smoothed. Across the hall, the second candle leaned in the opposite direction. The room in this new geometry learned a different kind of balance. Light answering light across a moving river of air. Some people closed their eyes and let the sound of weather pass through their ribs. Others opened their eyes wider, surprised at how beautiful a leaning flame could be. The storm, seeing it, could not frighten the candles into an argument, grew bored. Like all performers who thrive on resistance, it turned its solo into a duet with the rafters and went elsewhere to show off its muscles. The door settled. The night took a breath. The candle lifted slowly until her flame stood like a quiet spine. After the service, an old man remained. He had the posture of someone who had carried too many names and was ready to set some down. He sat near the candle and watched her burn. "All my life," he said to no one, "I thought peace meant nothing. Moves." He chuckled. "But look at you." The candle did not look. She simply continued. And in continuing, she answered him. "Peace is not the absence of wind," she might have said. "It is learning to hold a steady center while listening to the wind's stories." Seasons rounded the marsh. Winter brought a wind so cold it chiseled the air into glass. The candle learned that her light could turn the edge of that glass into a prism. The room's breath became colored, as if the night had decided to wear jewels. Spring brought a wind that smelled of new stitches in old fabric. The candle learned to glow a little wider, to invite pollen-drunk bees who wandered in by mistake and left a little golden laughter on the floorboards. Summer's wind was lazy and generous, as if waving from a hammock. Autumn's wind was busy tying red leaves to the hour and then untying them. Through all these moods, a truth ripened the candle, and the wind were not enemies. They were conversation partners. The wind asked, "Who are you?" when pushed. The candle replied, "I am the warmth that remains." The wind asked, "What if I come?" Suddenly, the candle said, "Then let me be sudden too, and return." The wind asked, "What if I am gentle?" The candle smiled. "Then perhaps we can read together." On the night the candle burned to her last inch, the room was quiet, the way a well-played song is quiet. After it ends, the notes still visible in the air, like dust in a beam. The monk knew. He had watched many endings, none of them failures. He lit a new candle and placed it beside the old, not to replace, but to accompany the way one friend sits with another when the conversation is almost finished. The wind came and stood in the doorway, respectful, as if arriving at a bedside. The old candle's flame grew small and blue at the throat, then bright again, as if remembering, and then letting go. She looked around with the eyes of warmth, and saw the faces she had illumined, the prayers she had overheard the little paper crane now slightly yellowed by days. She felt no fear. "Thank you," she thought to the wind. "You taught me how to bow. To the darkness, you taught me how to be seen. To the new candle, you will learn the rest." Her last breath of light rose and became part of the room's memory, a soft echo in the grain of the altar, a kindness in the brass that would greet every future flame. Smoke curled upward like handwriting that did not need to be read to be understood. The wind took it gently and carried it over the marsh, where reeds would tell each other, in their sibilant language, that something had ended and something had begun, and that both were the same story told with different verbs. The new candle burned, and the monk poured tea. Outside, night practiced being endless, and then, as always, lost on purpose, so dawn could be found. If you sit there long enough, you can hear what the candle learned, that a steady heart does not require a still world, that the wind is a teacher with rough hands and good intentions, that we do not need to fear the movement that passes through us when what we are is the light that remains after the passing. And if tonight a draft slips under your door, if the curtain stirs, and your own small flame leans and trembles, you may place a hand near your heart and feel it bow. Then return and know without needing to say it out loud that this too is part of the way light learns to love the dark. Story 5. The Buddha and the Broken Bell. There was a bell in a hilltop temple whose voice had once braided morning to afternoon and stitched dusk to night. Cast from a patient mixture of copper and tin, it wore a skin the color of autumn when it becomes brave. Its mouth was wide and kind. Its rim had been fingered by generations of hands that knew the difference between ringing and listening. When the wind pressed its cheek to the courtyard, the bell answered in a note that felt like warm tea poured through the ribs, a tone so round it made even the stones remember their softer beginnings. Pilgrims said they could hear the bell in their sleep, as if the night itself were a monk who hummed while sweeping. One summer, the bell cracked. It did not happen dramatically. There was no lightning, no quarrel between gods. A hairline seam simply emerged along the lower curve, as if metal had remembered it was once earth and wanted to confess. The first time the mallet touched the rim afterward, the tone split like light through old glass. Not one note, but two, and the second dragged its feet. The sound wobbled, limped, apologized. Birds startled from the eaves. The youngest monk winced, as if embarrassed for a friend who had stumbled while crossing the room. "Retire it," someone suggested, the way people suggest replacing what no longer behaves perfectly. Melt it down and cast another. We have the molds. We know the recipe. Another monk proposed hanging it as a relic, silent, with a plaque that said, "Once a voice that guided the village." The abbot said nothing. He walked to the bell and laid his palm against its cool, scarred side. The crack felt like a river on a map. He did not remove his hand for a long time. In the weeks that followed, the temple learned to move without the bell's old certainty. Morning came in the same way, but less threaded. The kitchen fires sighed. The broom did its whispering work. The chant still rose like mist from the reeds of the monks' throats. But it seemed that the day required one more breath than before to become itself, as if the world were a shirt missing a button. The abbot asked that the bell be rung anyway, softly only at dawn and at dusk, with the mallet wrapped in cloth, so the blow would be more of an embrace. The note that came was peculiar. It began true, then turned and looked over its shoulder, then continued on a little unsure of its own shadow. Some found it ugly, others found it honest. The children of the village liked to imitate it, laughing until their laughter sounded like the bell, and the bell sounded like their laughter. One evening, a traveler arrived and asked to stay the night. His robe was the color of earth that has been rained on just enough to remember scent. His eyes held the depth of someone who had watched many seasons try on their faces. He sat with the monks for the simple meal ate, as if hunger were a flower that did not need to be praised, and afterward wandered to the courtyard, where the bell hung between two stout beams like a moon that had chosen a small orbit. He touched the rim with the back of his fingers and smiled, not with amusement, but with recognition, as if meeting an old friend who would not stand up from a chair because the conversation in the chair was too good. The abbot joined him. The traveler asked about the crack, not to diagnose, but to listen to the story of its arrival. The abbot told it plainly. "We are deciding what to do," he said. "We have been told that a broken bell is a poor guide. A broken bell," the traveler said, "is still a bell. It is the world that has learned to sing in more than one voice." He lifted the mallet, felt its weight, and without ceremony gave the bell a gentle tap. The note poured out faithful, then flawed, then faithful again, and dissolved into the courtyard, where reeds and crickets and the soft arithmetic of footfalls took it apart and put it back together. "Do you hear the second tone?" he asked. "I do," the abbot said. "It bothers some." "It asks for attention," the traveler said. "That is different from bothering. When a river splits around a stone, it makes a sound where otherwise there might have been only moving. Perhaps the temple has been given a stone to teach listening." That night, the traveler slept under the eaves near the bell, as if trusting it to keep the weather kindly confused. He woke before dawn in the small blue hour that tastes of metal and bread. When the novice came with the cloth-wrapped mallet, the traveler stood back. The novice bowed to the bell out of habit, and a little fear then struck. The sound rose, carried its imperfection, like a lantern with a cracked pane that makes the light into a kind of star. Far below in the village, a woman nursing her child paused and smiled without knowing why. A baker paused with flour on his arms and imagined for a moment that the oven had a heartbeat. The note ended. The day began. The traveler did not leave the next day. He offered to help sweep to wash bowls, to repair the fence where goats criticized the boundary. He worked the way some people pray, with his whole posture. The monks grew used to his silence, and then to his sentences, which were not many, but always placed as carefully as cups on a shelf. In the late afternoon, he asked to hear the bell again. He stood with eyes half closed, like someone reading the sky with the lids. "What do you hear?" the abbot asked. I hear the old note, the traveler said, which is the temple's memory. I hear the second note, which is the temple's confession. And in the space between them, I hear a third thing. It has no pitch. It is the attention that holds both without choosing. The abbot listened into that space, and the space listened back. Something in him loosened the way a knot loosens when you stop yanking and start breathing. He remembered how, as a boy, he had loved the bell less for its perfection than for the way it made silence feel like a friend who could afford to be generous. He had forgotten that. He had forgotten that the bell did not only mark time, it also made room for time. When word spread that the temple might keep the broken bell villagers came to offer their opinions. Some arrived with fondness, braided into worry. A temple deserves a perfect bell. A merchant said, eyes counting and consoling at once. We are not poor, he added, which meant, we can fix this. A farmer shook her head. The cows walk to a crooked fence as easily as a straight one, she said, which meant things work if you let them. A child tugged at the abbot's sleeve and asked, "Can a bell be sad?" "Yes," the abbot said, "and it can be brave." The traveler asked whether he might try something. He gathered thin strips of cotton and a small bowl of lacquer made from the tree that weeps its golden resin into careful hands. He tore the cloth into threads and soaked them, then wrapped them lightly along the crack, not to seal it, but to honor it, as if drawing a poem where the metal had already composed a line. The lacquer dried the color of late afternoon. "We call this mending," he said, "but it is really a reminder that mending is not erasing." The bell looked different now, flawed and formal, damaged and dignified, like a face that has chosen to keep its laugh lines. At the next dawn, the abbot invited the traveler to ring the bell. The traveler shook his head. "I would like the novice to do it," he said. The boy approached, with new care, held the mallet, as if it might whisper instructions, and struck with a touch that believed the bell knew how to answer without being told. The note rose, and if you had listened with eyes closed, you might have said nothing had changed. Yet everyone felt their chests expand, as if the air itself had made an agreement with mercy. The second tone wavered as before, but the ear found it easier to love. The cotton held no sound. It simply held the story of the crack in a softer light. That evening, a storm marched up the valley with banners of rain. The temple smelled of wet wood and soup. The monks closed the shoji and made the lamps modest. When the wind pressed hard, the bell shivered on its beam. The abbot felt his old fear arrive that one more stress would break what already bore a seam. The traveler rested his palm on the wood uprights. "The bell trusts the beam," he said. "So can we." When the worst of the weather moved on, the abbot asked the novice to ring. The sound threaded itself through the departing rain and gathered the drops into a listening that steadied their falling. The storm hearing, something older than itself, bowed and left the mountain alone. In the weeks after, something odd and ordinary happened. People began to bring their own cracks to the temple. Not the visible kind, although those came too. A chipped bowl, a torn sleeve, a broken locket. Mostly, they brought the seams that ran along their days, the hairline split between who they were and who they thought they should be. The fissure left by a father's silence, the crevasse of grief that looked like a smooth field until you stepped into it and did not know how to climb back out. They sat in the courtyard and listened to the bell lean into its second voice, and then into the space that held both, and some of them cried without fully understanding why crying in a place that did not require explanations could feel like a kind of music. A woman who had lost a child stood one evening and laid her hand where the lacquer shone. "I have been angry at everything that keeps ringing," she said. "Today, I hear that ringing is not betrayal. It is just the world continuing to be the world, and I am invited to be part of it when I can." A young man who had failed at something he thought defined him sat with his head bent and whispered, "I thought the crack would become the only thing people heard. Now I think the crack is the invitation to listen closer." Sometimes at dusk, the traveler told a story, but never the same story twice. Once, he spoke of a musician whose violin had a scar along the ribs. It changed the tone, he said. Not better or worse, truer to the life that had happened. People said they could hear the winters. Another time, he spoke of a bowl repaired with seams of gold that turned the break into a map of return. "We are always being made," he said. Not once, but again. He did not point to the bell when he said this. He did not need to. Harvest came. The fields wore the patient smiles of those who have kept their promises. At the festival, the villagers asked the monks to bring the bell down the mountain so that its voice could bless the new grain. The abbot hesitated. The path was steep, and the bell was heavy with history. But the traveler said, "Let the bell walk with its people." They lashed poles through the frame and lifted together, slowly, a dozen shoulders, learning to be one back. Along the way, the bell knocked gently against the wood, speaking in a small, private rhythm, like a mother humming to a child who already sleeps. In the square, the bell was set on a cradle of stones. The mallet was wrapped in clean cloth. When the abbot raised it, the crowd fell into the kind of quiet that tastes like bread torn and shared. The first strike carried through the stalks stacked high through the baskets, and the laughter, and the tired feet, and rose into the blue where the day had hung its simple flags. The second tone followed, and with it came a visible softening. Shoulders, lowered jaws, forgot their work. Eyes released their tight grip on the edges of the world. The square did not stop being noisy. It became instead a noise arranged by kindness. That night, after the bell had been carried home, the traveler told the abbot he would be leaving at dawn. The abbot felt a small sadness arrive and sit beside him, like a well-mannered guest. "You have taught us much," he said. "I have reminded you of what you already knew." The traveler replied, "You lived with it so long, you forgot to call it wisdom." "Where will you go?" the abbot asked. "Where the next crack needs a friend," the traveler said, but he said it with a smile that suggested the road was simply another kind of courtyard. Before he slept, he walked to the bell and placed his forehead against the rim, the way some people greet door frames in the houses that have kept them safe. "Thank you," he said, for himself, and for the medal, and for the hands that had lifted and lowered and struck and endured. May you keep teaching what wholeness really means. In the years that followed, the temple never replaced the bell. The crack widened a breath, then stopped, as if deciding it had said enough. The lacquer darkened to the color of evening that does not need a lamp. The tone continued to carry two voices, and the silence that welcomed them both. Children grew up, counting their days by that sound. Lovers quarreled and reconciled under it. Elders left this world while it was ringing their last exhale, braided into a note that had long practiced the art of remaining without clinging. Sometimes, when fog lay heavy and sound traveled like a slow animal, villagers swore they could hear a third tone. Clearly, not the first honest note, not the second wounded one, but a hum that seemed to belong to the space, listening to both. That is the Buddha. An old woman said once, not to claim anything grand, but to give a shape to gratitude. That is the part of us that does not choose sides. If tonight you feel the seam in your own chest, the fine line where an old event keeps speaking, in a language you wish you had never learned, you may place a hand there and listen, the way the abbot listened with his palm to bronze. You may discover that the crack is not the enemy of your sound, that your voice can carry tenderness and tremor without becoming less true. And if, as you lie down, some bell far away rings with a note that wavers, you may let it enter you, like a visitor who knows where the cups are, and trust that even a broken bell can guide a village to morning. That even a broken heart can guide a person to sleep. That what is whole is not what has never been touched by the world, but what has been touched deeply and learned to sing anyway. Story 6. The lotus beneath the mud, at the far end of a quiet village where the road let go of its stones and became a footpath of softened earth. There was a pond that did not insist on being beautiful. In spring, it wore a film of green, a quilt of algae stitched by wind. In summer, dragonflies wrote their blue cursive across its skin. In autumn, the water went dark as tea, and the reeds whispered to each other about endings that were never quite endings. In winter, a thin ice trembled on top, and the world peered at itself as if through old glass. People passed the pond and rarely stopped. They had more convincing destinations: the market with its bright chatter, the temple with its bell, the fields that needed hands. Only one person lingered: the gardener, who rented a small plot behind the school and grew vegetables with the kind of attention that makes even a carrot feel seen. Her name was Mara. She was neither young nor old, but carried both seasons lightly. She had a way of listening that made the wind slow down to explain itself. When her day in the garden ended, she would walk to the pond and stand with her hands tucked into the sleeves of her jacket, searching the surface for something she could not name. Once, years ago, she had visited a city and seen a lotus blooming in a courtyard pool. The flower had opened like the morning remembering a promise. Its petals held a color that refused to pick a side, white that knew something about pink, pink that still respected white. The air around it felt cleaner for no good reason. It was the first time Mara had understood that beauty could be an argument no one needed to win. So Mara decided to grow lotus at the village pond. She did not announce this decision with banners. She did not petition the council. She simply spent her small savings on a few tubers sent in brown paper, each knobby length wrapped in damp moss, like a secret being gently told. When they arrived in early spring, the ground still remembered winter in its deeper pockets. Mara knelt at the edge of the pond and slid her hands into the mud. It was cold and richer than anyone gave it credit for smelling of years and patient endings. She pressed the tubers down into that brown generosity and covered them as one might tuck in a child who prefers the dark to the night light. People watched from the path. Lotus. A man asked not unkindly, the syllables carrying a smile that leaned toward doubt. In this, Mara looked up mud to her wrists and nodded. In this, she said. He shrugged, the way people shrug when they remember other people's dreams are not theirs to manage. children drifted over curious, and Mara let them touch the leaves of the lilies that already lived there, explaining the difference between a leaf that floats and a bud that will one day rise. Days lengthened. A green coin appeared on the surface, small as a button you might sew into a cuff and forget until winter. Then another, and another, spaced like soft breaths. Mara visited each morning and evening. She did not rush the pond with demands. She offered a presence that felt like shade. When algae tried to colonize the new leaves, she coaxed it aside, not as an enemy, but as a neighbor being asked to share the view. She fed the pond with composted tea, the color of dusk. She stood quietly enough that birds decided she was furniture and used her patience as a porch. Summer came holding heat in both hands. The village smelled of tomato vines and cut grass, and the bakers morning courage. Mara's garden fattened with cucumbers and small moons of squash. Still, no lotus opened. The leaves grew bigger, round as plates, lifting themselves on stems that practiced standing. They were beautiful in their shy way, small umbrellas that turned rain into applause. But villagers who had been promised a miracle without knowing they had asked for one began to tease. "Your mud loves you." A vendor laughed, "But your lotus is shy." Another shook his head. "Perhaps this pond has too much history." Mara smiled. She understood that patience is not a performance. She continued to come to watch the water find its quiet places, to learn the pond's breath. One evening, the sky traded its blue for the color of peaches left too long in the bowl. The wind calmed. Frogs tested the first notes of a sermon they would later deliver properly. Mara stood at her usual place. Out near the middle, where the water wore deeper thoughts, something lifted. She leaned forward, heart stubborn but trim. A bud had risen tight as a fist, made by someone who has just remembered they are allowed to unclench. It was not spectacular. It was simply possible, and possibility is often the most miraculous face beauty wears. Mara wanted to wake the village, but she also wanted to let the night keep its secrets until morning could carry them gently. She went home and boiled rice, sat on her small porch, and ate with the slow gratitude of someone who knows what she is really tasting is time. Before dawn, she returned. Mist lay on the pond like breath forgotten and left in a room. The bud had swelled. With the first brush of light, the petals began to loosen edges, separating with the shy grandeur of theater curtains, opening for a play that needs no audience. The flower revealed itself not all at once, but with the decency of something that knows you must learn to look. White with a blush, that remembered strawberries as a story rather than a fact. Yellow at the center, like a soft bell, ringing only for the bees. Mara did not clap. She did not cry. She stood and let the flower instruct her ribs in how to widen without forcing. When villagers wandered by on their way to the day they stopped, and the morning grew gentler by the number of feet that ceased to hurry. From this, the same man whispered eyes on the flower hands in pockets, nodding toward the mud with his chin. From exactly this, Mara said. He did not shrug. He placed a hand over his heart as if to make sure it had heard. News traveled. More buds rose, some failing, some succeeding, all of them honest. The pond, which had never been a liar, but had often been ignored, became a teacher. Children brought sketchbooks and drew circles that improved simply by being drawn. Elders came and sat on the bench Mara built from cedar, remembering loves they had sent into the dark and watched return as something else, a hobby that became a livelihood, a grief that became a softer room. A young woman stood for a long time in a dress she had chosen for the future and realized she could step into it one day at a time without apologizing for the days she could not. Late one afternoon, a storm arrived with the solemnity of a guest who knows the family well. The sky practiced the art of letting go. Rain hit the broad lotus leaves and ran to their centers, gathering into pearls, and then dropping into the pond with small syllables of joy. The flowers closed. Wind moved across the water and made 1,000 small decisions. Mara stood beneath her hood and watched the mud accept everything without complaint. It did not argue with rain or take offense at the wind. It held the roots in a darkness that was not unfriendly. She felt the lesson enter, not as a thought, but as a posture allow. When the storm passed, the world smelled rinsed. The lotus opened again, as if dawn had knocked a second time to be sure no one missed it. Mara realized then that the flower's beauty was only half the teaching. The other half was the mud. She had thought she came to the pond to coax a bloom out of stubborn ground. She understood now that she had come to learn how to live in ground that remembers everything and still offers more. The mud did not resent the lotus for rising. The lotus did not despise the mud for holding it. Each did what it knew how to do, and together they made a face the world could not stop looking at. As summer stretched, the pond changed into a slow ceremony. Bees kept their appointments. Turtles arranged themselves on logs like medallions granted for patience. Sometimes a flower fell apart in the afternoon petals, letting go one by one, each surrender casual as a breath. Children asked if that was sad. Mara shook her head. "It's just another way of blooming," she said. "Some flowers open by closing." One evening, the school music teacher wandered down with a small class. She had them sit and breathe while she plucked a quiet melody on a guitar that had learned about mercy from the way fingers forgive strings for being taught. The children sang not loudly, but truthfully. The words were simple. From dark, from deep, from hands of time, a light we keep. The song did not echo. It soaked in. Even the mud listened. Autumn began to lean its shoulder against the door. Lotuses grew fewer, then paused. Leaves yellowed. Stems surrendered their insistence and bent as if nodding to the year that had carried them. Mara gathered seeds, small as promises, not yet spoken. She tucked some into envelopes to share with anyone who had stood at the pond and felt something adjust quietly inside them. The rest she pushed back into the mud as one returns a borrowed book, richer for the reading. That winter was not cruel. It was simply thorough. Ice came and tried on the pond like a coat that fit too well. The village walked faster. Smoke learned new dances. Mara visited anyway. She stood and watched sparrows skitter along the edge and thought of the flower sleeping under the thick dark. Not arguing, not panicking, not doubting that the world could change its mind back toward warmth. She placed a palm over the ice and felt nothing but cold, and still she smiled. The mud was down there, faithful as always, holding what it held without needing witnesses. When spring returned, it did not trumpet. It knocked softly and then entered. The pond yawned. Frogs announced schedules. The first green coins broke the surface again. Mara knew now how to wait without turning the waiting into a verdict. When the first lotus opened that year, she did not greet it as a miracle she had engineered. She greeted it as a friend emerging from a room that had been safe enough to rest in. If you find yourself tonight cataloging the mess beneath your own calm, the memories that cloud the fears, that thicken the failures like silt, your heart keeps stirring. Remember the pond that did not insist on being beautiful. Remember how the lotus rose not by fighting the mud, but by rooting in it, taking from darkness what darkness offers: best nutrients, coolness, the hush that allows a new shape to imagine itself. You do not need to clean the water to earn the flower. You only need to stay, to breathe, to let the old stories settle until clarity is not forced, but found. And when sleep comes, perhaps slowly, like a petal, deciding which direction counts as open. Let it find you the way the lotus finds morning. Not because night has been defeated, but because night has been befriended. Let your thoughts float like broad leaves that catch the rain and give it back easily. Let your body be the mud that says yes to roots. Somewhere inside, a pale bud gathers itself, unafraid of what it grows, from certain only of what it is becoming. It will open when it opens. It will close when it must. Between those two gestures is a life you can rest inside, a softness strong enough to hold you, a quiet bright enough to rise with. Story 7. The old tree that dreamed of spring on a hill that had learned to keep the town in its gentle lap. An old tree stood with a posture that remembered both storms and lullabies. Its bark was a map of rivers. No cartographer could name its knots like closed eyes that had seen enough. In winter, from a distance, it looked like a poem written in charcoal branches, lifted in quiet grammar against a pale sky, punctuation marks of crows arriving and leaving as if to edit nothing. The tree had outlived fences and fashions, barns with roofs rebuilt, and roofs surrendered children who became elders, and elders who became stories. It had been thunder's listener and moonlight's ladder. It knew how to lose its leaves without turning loss into a performance. And still, there was a longing that rose in it each year, like a tide too polite to flood the memory of spring, not as a season, but as a way of breathing. When the snow first came that winter, the tree allowed it to lace its branches to turn every small twig into a bright sentence that said, "Only now." Wind braided itself through the crown and hummed a tone that the tree recognized from other Januaries. Fox tracks stitched the slope. A child in a red hat tossed crumbs and declared the hill a kingdom. The tree listened the way trees listen through rings that were once soft through sap, that traveled like a pilgrim with a lantern through roots that read the soil's diary line by line. Under the frost, the ground was holding secrets that only patience could translate. The tree did not mind waiting. The tree had made a profession of it. At night, when the town's windows practiced their small constellations and smoke walked out of chimneys to greet the stars, the tree dreamed. Dreaming for a tree is not like human dreaming. There are fewer faces and more weather. There is less plot and more music. In the tree's dream, spring arrived without fanfare. Snow stepped back like a guest who knows when to leave. The air loosened its collar. Somewhere, a door banged in a barn, and the echo came uphill, wearing the smell of hay. Buds swelled at the ends of branches, shy fists remembering they had fingers. In the dream, birds rehearsed names for the morning and chose all of them. The tree felt sap move with a confidence it could not justify, except by saying, "This is what happens when the world leans toward yes." The dream would let go before dawn, leaving a sweetness in the wood, like tea forgotten, but still warm. The tree woke into frost and did not argue. It let the cold make its honest case. Icicles wrote their brief philosophy. The sun read it and underlined a line or two at noon. A boy sledded down the hill, bumped a root, fell into laughter, and lay on his back to watch the branchwork sky. He raised a mitten and traced the shape of the crown, as if outlining a cathedral. The tree received the gesture and stored it the way it stored rain for later. Storms came. One arrived with the brusque tenderness of an old aunt, knocking everything straight and crooked with equal enthusiasm. The tree bent. An old branch, long hollowed by time's quiet carpentry, cracked and fell thudding into the snow with the satisfying honesty of gravity. The town gathered the next day, and a man with careful hands sawed the fallen limb into segments that showed a century in rings. He pressed his palm to the stump, eyes softened by the arithmetic of years. "Thank you," he said, though he could not have explained to whom. The tree did not hear the words with ears. It felt them arrive through the ground, a tone as real as thunder, smaller, warmer. When night grew long again, the tree dreamed a second dream. In this, one spring did not arrive like a parade, but like a friend slipping into a pew beside you, quiet, late forgiven by the way the light changed when she sat down. The tree felt tiny insects wake in the bark, their lives beginning like whispered ideas. It felt the soil lift its tired head and remember seeds, remember the small syllables of roots practicing how to say through. A rain fell that smelled of metal and new bread. The tree drank, and the drink traveled in corridors no eye had ever seen, corridors that had always been there, faithful as backstage hands. In the dream, there was wind, but not the kind that argues. It was the kind that arranges the hair of children and the feathers of geese and the thinking of those who had been thinking too hard. Outside the dream, the cold returned with a briefer conviction. A thin, bright morning placed glass on everything. The tree did not complain. It carried birds on days when branches felt like delicate scaffolding for small choruses. It carried silence on days when even crows declined to editorialize. It carried stars. That is a secret fact of trees. They carry stars each night, and put them back each dawn without asking for thanks. When the moon stepped through the branches like a careful nurse, the tree felt a tenderness older than seasons. If longing had teeth, they were gentle. If patience had a tongue, it was prayer. One afternoon in late winter, a girl came to the hill alone. Her coat was too thin for the calendar. She leaned against the trunk, the way someone leans against a memory to see if it will hold. In her pocket was a letter she had not decided to send. In her chest was a weather system that could not make up its mind. She pressed her cheek to the bark and closed her eyes. The tree, noticing the weight, softened itself the way wood knows how, by remembering it is alive. The girl cried a little, then less. She left with her hands in her pockets and her head slightly higher, and the hill kept her secret the way hills keep oceans, by being trustworthy ground. A warm wind finally threaded itself across the town one morning, like a rumor that turned out to be true. Snow, which had been so good at staying, learned how to travel. The hill bled brown and then green at the edges. The tree felt a pressure inside that was not pain and not exactly joy, a push that was also a pull, the root's agreement with the sky, the bud's promise to the leaf. If you had put a stethoscope to the trunk, you might have heard a slow violin. If you had placed your ear to the ground, you might have heard the old conversations, resuming worms, commuting stones, telling jokes, water spelling its ABCs in the dark. Buds appeared small as beads, then larger, each a held breath. The tree did not rush them. Rushing is not in a tree's grammar. It simply made room. Sun warmed one side and then the other. Cloud drew soft veils and then folded them again. One morning, the first leaf opened a green so clean it could make you forgive the world for ever being complicated. The leaf did not applaud itself. It simply increased the amount of shade available. More leaves followed each arrival, making less sky and more song. The tree's crown filled until it looked like a thought, completely thought, generous, and without edges. Birds returned with pockets full of errands. A robin argued kindly with a blue jay about the definition of urgency. Sparrows made paragraph after paragraph in the hedge, and then published them by flying. A pair of finches built a nest in a crook shaped like the letter that begins the word home. The tree held them all with the even-handedness of a good host. It did not ask for rent. It charged only the fee of trust, which is paid in mornings, in landings, in the courage to sleep above the ground. Children ran circles at the base arms, out as if growing their own branches. Lovers carved initials with more hope than wisdom. The tree forgave. Time would close the wounds into ovals that looked like eyes, and the eyes would look like forgiveness. Old men leaned canes against the trunk and told weather stories to anyone who would listen. And when no one listened, they told them to the bark. And when the bark did not respond, they nodded, satisfied, because the telling had been the point all along. But even in green, the tree kept the memory of winter, not as a threat, as texture. Shade moved through the day like a slow clock. Bees stitched gold sentences between blossoms you could not see unless you knew where to look. The town carried on with its errands, bread to bake streets, to sweep letters to mail, and to destroy. The tree's dreaming changed. It dreamed of rain in summer, of fruits fat as thumbs, of the way wind in leaves sounds like applause given freely to no one on a stage. Then, one night, a wind arrived from far fields where corn learns to gossip. It climbed the hill with mischief, but not malice. It shook the branches as if to see which memories were ripe. The tree answered with creaks. The wind translated as laughter. Leaves flashed their pale undersides, and then their deeper greens, a flutter that looked like an argument and was actually a dance. The girl in the too thin coat, now with a thicker one, and a letter sent and answered, stood at her window below and watched the crown sway. She felt a sway inside her, a matching motion that did not ask permission. Some part of her that had been brittle remembered how to move without breaking. Summer came wearing handfuls of daylight. The hill smelled of cut grass and small engines and peaches dreaming of ripeness. The tree offered shade like a public service. Picnic blankets spread. Stories were told with mouths full. A dog discovered the miracle of stick and petitioned for its return to the kingdom of throwing. A man lay with his head in the lap of a woman he hoped to love, as long as love could stand to be loved. Overhead, the tree arranged the light into manageable parcels. Sun filtered through, leaf through air, through eyelash, until it became a tenderness on skin that asked for nothing in return. When rain came, the tree took it in with the appreciation of a letter written by someone far away, whose handwriting you recognize and trust. Water slid from leaf to leaf, gathered at the points, and fell with a tiny pause that dared you to name it. The ground drank. Roots hummed. In the dark wood, small secret factories worked without wages to turn rain and light into shelter. If this is not a miracle, the tree thought, if thinking is what we can call what trees do, then perhaps our definitions are too small. Autumn knocked with knuckles of cool. The first leaf to change did so privately, deep in the crown, where most eyes could not see. It tested a gold that looked like memory saying thank you. The change spread in a way that was not spreading, but deepening. Green admitted it had always carried yellow. Yellow confessed it had always flirted with red. Red blushed into russet, into a brown, soft, as a final sentence spoken by someone who has learned which words matter. The tree let go one leaf, then 100, then 1,000, each fall unique, and also the same, like a choir singing one long note in many voices. The hill carpeted itself in softness. Children gathered piles and flung them into the air, inventing weather. And in the first true cold, when the tree stood once more in an architecture of branches, lean and exact, it did not feel empty. It felt articulated. The sky could enter everywhere now. Stars had more doors. The moon could hang its silver on any hook. The tree began dreaming, winter's dream again. But now the dream included the girl with the letter, the boy with the sled, the couple with their heads close, the man with flower on his sleeves, the robin's argument, the dog's petition, the bee's essays, the fox's cursive along the snow, the old aunt storm, the careful-handed Sawyer, the red hat, the laddered moon. It included you too, listening where you are under a roof or a sky, with your own weather, deciding whether to stay or go. If your chest feels like winter, clean, spare, honest, and a little exposed, let the old tree lend you its patience. You can dream of spring without scolding the cold. You can hold the memory of leaves without accusing the branches. You can stand where you are and be thoroughly here, ringed with all you have survived. When sleep asks to come in, do not interview it. Open the door like a hill opens to snow, and let rest cover what needs covering. In the dark, beneath your thinking sap, is already moving toward the tender places. Buds you cannot name are practicing their small fists, not to fight, but to become hands. Morning will arrive when it does, and you will recognize it, not by trumpets, but by the way your breath loosens its grip and chooses again, simply, kindly, to stay. Story 8. The fisherman who stopped casting nets. At the lip of a small harbor where the water wore a constant shrug, there lived a fisherman named Aiden, whose hands had learned the language of rope before they learned to rest. He kept his boat in a narrow berth between a red-hulled trawler that told loud stories and a skiff that seemed to have no history at all. Each morning, for years, He had risen when the clock was still guessing. At time, lit the stove, boiled water that forgot to taste like anything except morning, and walked to the pier with the deliberate stride of someone trying not to wake the sea. He would untie the same knots he had tied the night before, step into the same wooden silence, and push off into a dawn that repeated itself like a prayer said by heart and not yet understood. The nets were his argument with uncertainty. Square and patient, they folded and unfolded the way some people fold and unfold the day's news, hoping that this time, in this arrangement, something generous will appear. Aiden had learned to read the sea by its smallest facial expressions. The sparkle that meant bait fish were nervously deciding their future. The shy dimpling that meant currents were speaking under their breath. The blue that meant yes. The other blue that meant not today. He could set a net where no map would have told him to, and bring home enough silver to keep the stove brave. And yet, when the house was quiet and the boat was sleeping against its rope, a fatigue would come to him that had nothing to do with muscles. It felt like trying to carry water in his chest with a wicker basket. Whatever he gathered slipped through. One night in late autumn, after a wind had rewritten all the answers and left the harbor chapped and thoughtful, Aiden dreamed. In the dream, he was walking along a midnight shore that knew his name but did not call it. The tide had withdrawn into a long, soft breath, and on the wet sand lay his nets unrolled, shining faintly, as if the moon had stitched them to the earth. He bent to lift one, and it dissolved in his hands into a single strand, which then turned into a ribbon of light, which then turned into nothing you could pick up. On the horizon, the figure of a man appeared, or perhaps it was only a tall buoy wearing light like a coat. The figure raised a hand, and Aiden felt a message more than he heard it. What you want is already inside the boat. When he looked down, he was standing in his boat, but it was filled with quiet. He woke with the taste of salt that had not come from the wind. Aiden tried to forget the dream, the way one shakes rain off a coat, but it stayed gentle and insistent. Morning came in its old shirt, but he could not make his hands perform the rehearsal they knew so well. He lit the stove, watched the kettle tremble, and found himself not reaching for the rope. He walked to the pier without gear, just a thermos under his arm, and a curiosity that felt like a door he had never noticed in his own house. He sat on the piling and let the harbor be what it was. Gulls arguing kindly about definition, a dog announcing the news to the rocks, the tide writing and erasing in equal measure. What you want is already inside the boat. He repeated it to himself until it became less like a sentence and more like weather. When his neighbor Tom saw him empty-handed, he laughed the way friends laugh when they hope to wake something from foolishness. Forgot something big. Aiden. Aiden shook his head. I'm watching, he said. Watching what Tom asked, scanning for signs. The part I always fish past Aiden, said, and Tom, who had been alive long enough to admit that riddles sometimes make more sense than facts left him to it. For a week, Aiden did not cast. He untied and retied ropes, as if learning a different alphabet. He motored out into the gentle blue and cut the engine where the water was less sure of itself. He drifted. The boat, surprised to be trusted, behaved well. He watched how the sun braided thin gold through the chop and then unbraided it as if undecided. He noticed the way small fish made arrows that pointed nowhere. He listened to the wooden hull answer the water's questions with a calm he had rarely allowed it. He drank coffee that finally tasted like coffee, not ambition. When he returned to the pier, his hold was empty, and his shoulders were quietly full. People worried for him, because that is one of the ways love shows up first. Rest day, they asked, and then when the days multiplied, everything okay? Aiden shrugged. The kind of shrug that leaves the door open. He went to the market anyway, and bought bread and onions and fish from someone else's morning. He found it easier than he thought it would be to hand over coins for what he used to pry from the sea with coaxing and calculation. He slept deeper, though he could not have said why. On the 6th day of not casting, as he drifted near the mouth of the harbor, where the tide forgets itself briefly and swirls, a child and her grandmother waved from the breakwater. The child's hair was the color of promises kept. The grandmother's coat was the color of patience. Are you fishing? The girl shouted, cupping her hands. I'm listening, Aiden called back. The grandmother nodded a nod that many winters had earned. To what? The girl persisted. To the part of the sea that isn't fish, Aiden said. The girl pointed at the water. But it's all fish. Not today. Aiden smiled. Today, it's also me. When the week ended, he tied the boat and walked home along the road that held the smell of kelp like an old memory. He passed the statue of a lighthouse keeper, cast in bronze, with one hand lifted as if catching the wind. He stopped, put his own hand up to match, and felt something align that had nothing to do with metal. He entered his house and found it larger. He made soup and ate it without adding a single thought. Later, He held his nets in his lap. The mesh lay quiet, smelling of sea and time, and the small sweetness of rope that has been held by a story. He did not hate them. He did not love them more than he used to. He set them on the floor and went to bed with the window a little open, letting the tide count for him. The next morning, he went out as usual, and the harbor, which does not keep track of our small rebellions, greeted him with its everyday face. He took the boat beyond the point where the cliffs put their stone shoulders into the wind and anchored in a patch of water as blue as a new idea. He sat. He breathed. He remembered the dream. What you want is already inside the boat. He looked. In the stern, a coil of rope waited. In the bow, a wooden crate. Beneath his feet, the slow heartbeat of wood expanding and contracting with the conversation between sun and water. Inside his chest, a space he had not given permission to grow had grown anyway. It was not shouting. It was simply there. He did not cast that day either. He steered the boat toward a flock of terns that were busy translating the surface, then turned away, as if letting the birds keep their paragraph. He watched a seal rise like a question mark and answer itself by slipping back under. He watched his own wanting rise and watched it too slip back under. In the quiet that followed, a different wanting arrived, less pointed, more round. It asked not for more fish, but for more room. He gave it what he could, the whole day. By the second week, something in town shifted. People stopped asking him if he was all right, and began telling him what had gone quiet inside them whenever they watched his little boat not behaving like a clock. A grocer said he had slept with the window open for the first time in months, and found that night had a kinder voice than he expected. A teacher said she had left 3 papers ungraded, and the world had not collapsed. In fact, her students had laughed more. A lighthouse mechanic admitted he had been listening to the foghorn too closely and had forgotten the fog. He returned to work with wool in his pockets and a slower wrench. One afternoon, a monk from the hilltop temple came down to the pier. He had heard rumors that a fisherman had stopped bargaining with the sea and started greeting it. The monk stood with Aiden, shared an orange, and watched the tide push and pull, as if it could not decide which word was more honest. "Why did you stop?" The monk asked, not to gather a lesson, but to see what would rise in the space of the question. Aiden looked at his hands. He could see in them all the mornings they had carried all the ropes they had persuaded, all the weights they had argued. "Because I was tired," he said. And then, after a pause that widened enough to be a small room because I wanted to know who I am when I'm not pulling." The monk nodded, and he asked. Aiden smiled, a smile that the harbor, if it had eyes, would have recognized. "I am someone who can float," he said. "I am someone who can go home empty and still be full. I am someone who can let the sea keep her secrets and not think she is withholding." The monk looked out where the color changed, where depth begins to talk to itself. "When you cast again," he said, "you will cast differently." Aiden considered this without needing to agree. The gulls made small parentheses of their wings and filled them with the word maybe. On the 20th day, Aiden woke before the clock and knew the day had decided something for him. He walked to the pier, untied the practiced knots, and pushed off. The nets lay folded in a clean stack, quiet, not sulking. The sea was the color of a soft yes. He motored to a place he had never fished, not because he did not know it was there, but because he had always assumed it was no good. He let the boat rest on the easy shoulder of a swell and set the first net not as a challenge, but as an offering. "Here is what I can do." He set the second. He did not hurry. He did not make bargains with numbers. He waited with the patience of someone who is no longer asking the day to prove anything. When he hauled the first net, it came heavy, and for a heartbeat, old reflexes returned calculations. Hunger, the urge to congratulate luck. Then the water broke, and the net showed him itself, not a haul of fish, but a shimmering catch of eel grass and weed, a small crab holding on with comic seriousness, a shoe that had spent a season learning to be a story. He laughed, a sound the sea accepted without critique. He freed the crab and watched it disappear like a thought that had the decency to leave. He shook loose the weeds, laid them back in the water like hair. He held the shoe and wondered who had learned to walk without it. The second net brought a modest run of mackerel, enough for dinner and for neighbors who would always insist on trading bread for fish, whether the math liked it or not. He returned to the pier near noon, a time he used to scold for being too bright. Tom waved. "You're back early," he called. "I'm back on time," Aiden answered, and felt the truth of it settle. He cleaned the fish at the table, the knife writing the old clean sentences, the gulls submitting their petitions. He brought 2 to the widow in the yellow house, who always pretended not to wait by the window, and 1 to the boy, who had a new cast on his arm and the humblest appetite in town. He kept 1 for himself. He cooked it with lemon and butter, and nothing more. He ate it with bread and nothing more. He felt full and nothing more. Word spread that Aiden had remembered how to fish without forgetting how to float. Others did not stop their nets, but some of them let the sea speak first. A woman who ran a cafe began opening an hour later on Wednesdays and sat by the water with her eyes closed and her apron folded in her lap, as if it too deserved a morning off. A father took his daughter to the pier at night and taught her how to name the dark without turning on a light. The harbor learned a new note that had always been there, the sound of people doing less and being more. When winter returned, Aiden fished lightly. The stove stayed brave. He left the harbor in a snow that turned the world honest. He came home sometimes with nothing, and sometimes with exactly what he could carry in 2 hands without making the day wince. The dream did not return because it did not need to. Its work had been absorbed by the waking. He still tied knots, and he still untied them, but he tied them looser, as if trusting the rope to remember itself. He still watched the water's face for news, but he also watched his own. And when it looked tired, he did not argue. If you, listening in your own harbor of blankets and thoughts, have been casting all day into currents that do not answer, if your nets keep returning with the same old ache disguised as effort, you might set your gear down tonight. You might let the boat of your body drift on the kind water that appears when you stop rowing. You might discover what Aiden learned without learning, that rest is not what happens when the work is over. It is the part that teaches the work its shape. What you want peace, ease enoughness, may already be inside the boat, quiet as breath, patient as tide. Close your eyes. Leave the window slightly open so the night can introduce itself. Listen for the harbor, your heart's version of it, counting softly in and out. You do not need to cast one more net. You do not need to solve one more wave. Let the boat rock. Let the knots loosen. Let the water hold you the way it holds the moonlight completely without trying. And when morning comes, rise not to chase the sea, but to greet it the way a friend meets a friend at the pier. No bargains, no hurry. Only the simple exchange of presence and a quiet smile that feels like home. Story 9. The mountain that bowed to the sea. At the far edge of a peninsula, where fog stitched cliffs to horizon, a mountain rose with the slow confidence of something that had never needed to hurry. From certain angles, it looked like a sleeping animal, from others like a spine lifting the sky a little higher so light could pass. Its shoulders were dark with pine. Its crown wore a scatter of snow late into summer. the way elders keep a strand of winter in their hair. Long ago, the mountain decided it was a keeper of boundaries. Behind it, valleys learned how to hold fields and villages. Before it, the sea rehearsed 1,000 blue moods and never once asked for permission. The mountain liked to think it stood between. It liked to think it kept the world from spilling. When wind came, the mountain received it like an old story told again for the pleasure of telling. When rain came, it gave the rain steps to climb, and then steps to descend, teaching it patience and gravity. When lightning stitched brief ladders between cloud and stone, the mountain glowed astonished as ever at how bright a stitch can be. If rock could speak aloud, the mountain might have said, "I am what does not move." And for centuries, that seemed true enough. Down the slope, where the cliff learned to be generous to gulls, and the grass kept practicing forgiveness, there was a village of wood and salt. Nets dried like open hands along the lane. Children learned the alphabet of tide with their calves in the foam. Fishermen and women traced weather on their faces and then erased it at supper with warm bread and laughter. Among them lived a child named Lila, who preferred questions with no fences. She would climb the lower path and sit on a step of stone. Big as a table, look out at the water's long vocabulary and ask the mountain anything that arrived. Where does the sea go when it leaves? Do clouds remember us? If I whisper to the tide, will it keep a secret? The mountain answered, the way mountains answer, with shade in summer, with a place to lean in winter, with the dependable fact of itself. Lila took these as replies and went home satisfied that not every answer must be a sentence. Each year, a ceremony was held when the last storms of winter had spent their shouting and the first brave flowers had opened tiny eyes along the goat path. Villagers climbed to a ledge the wind liked to polish and tied ribbons to a cedar. The ribbons were prayers, written in no language wishes that knew how to stand quietly. From there, you could see the mountain's stern profile and the sea's wide breathing. Back, and if you stood very still, you could feel the argument. Ancient things keep for the sake of balance. The mountain held. The sea moved. Between them, everything learned to be alive. One spring, a storm arrived late, wearing grief too large for its shoulders. It did not throw tantrums. It persisted. For 3 days, wind came from nowhere and everywhere, and the rain, instead of falling, seemed to lean a relentless shoulder against stone. The sea rose and spoke in a voice older than maps. Waves climbed the rock steps the mountain had offered all its life, and then unusually climbed a little farther. Boulders that had been faithful where they were, began to think about travel. The mountain felt a tug at its hem, a slow convincer called erosion that had always done its patient work, now asserting a point with underlined insistence. On the fourth morning, the storm fell apart in pieces and wandered off muttering apologies. Mist returned to its softer chores. Down on the lane, villagers counted fences and found most of them still where fences are happiest. Lila ran the cliff path, small feet, choosing old places with new care. At the bend before the cedar, she stopped. A ledge she loved, one that jutted like a balcony for thinking, had sheared away. The mountain stood unchanged at a glance, but the edge was now a new line in the old poem. Lila sat where sitting was still possible and put her palm on stone, warm from the first thin sun. "Did it hurt?" she asked, as if the mountain were a grandparent holding still for a portrait. The mountain said nothing, but the wind that threaded her hair smelled faintly of fresh dust and ocean. She took that as yes, and leaned her head against the rock, as children have leaned their heads against older truths since leaning was invented. All that day, the mountain regarded the sea with an attention it had not bothered to cultivate. From its crown, the water looked like a muscle contracting and easing, discovering and returning stronger in devotion than in argument. The mountain could see the path each wave took, could watch it rise to announce itself, and then bow, over and over. No boredom, only practice. The mountain felt in its deep body the slow inward river that had always flowed seepage and pressure and the small tick of time's chisels. But now that inward river had a rhythm that matched the sea below. A thought arrived that felt unfamiliar, and right strength, perhaps, is not standing without change, but changing without breaking what matters. That night, the mountain dreamed, and in the dream, the sea climbed all the way to the crown without anger. It lifted fish and kelp and the soft-spoken shellfish into the pines, and the pines did not complain. The sea left a necklace of foam along the ridge and whispered, "You hold, I move, but we both bow." The mountain woke before dawn with the taste of salt at the back of its stone mouth, and the sense that a new kind of day had set itself down like a bowl. When Lila climbed the path in the morning, she brought with her a spool of blue ribbon from her mother's drawer and a small bell shaped like a star. At the cedar, she tied the ribbon low at child height so the wind could remember children too. She placed the bell on a knot and listened to it argue gently with breeze. I think she told the mountain, because talking was easier than thinking alone. You might be allowed to change. She glanced toward the sea, which was working at nothing in particular, with generous concentration. "And you might be allowed to rest," she added, teaching herself the sentence by saying it. Days became a necklace again, each bead similar from a distance, each unique in the hand. The cliff's new edge learned its manners. Gulls adopted a new landing. A seal found a new notch where sun could stroke its back. The mountain tried on a new humility, the way one tries on a coat that had been in the house all along. It stood as it always had, but the standing had softened at the knees. It listened more deliberately to the water's argument, not to refute it, but to understand the shape of another kind of endurance, persistence, that looks like surrender and is not. In summer, a traveling monk wandered through the village, the kind of wanderer whose sandals were as eloquent as his smile. He accepted a bowl of stew and a story, and in trade, he offered only attention, which the village found sufficient. He walked the cliff path and stood at the new edge until his robe and the wind came to an agreement. Lila found him there. "Does a mountain bow?" she asked, pointing her chin at the gray presence listening down the coast. "Everything bows," the monk said, "some by bending, some by giving way, some by shining a little less so the other can shine. The sea bows every time it reaches and returns. The mountain bows by letting time touch it." He picked up a pebble and set it on the flat of his palm. "Even this, it bows by yielding its sharpness." Lila nodded, as if the answer had been waiting for the right mouth. She told the monk about the storm, the fallen ledge, the dream the mountain might have had. The monk smiled, admit a word he trusted. "When we sleep near great things," he said, "their dreams borrow our lungs. Perhaps you dreamed for the mountain." He tied a thin string to the star-shaped bell and let it ring once a syllable, small and true. And then he walked back down the path as people who are finished do. The year rounded its corners. Autumn flamed along the ridge. The sea wore heavier jewelry. In places where the cliff had always cut a hard line, ferns learned a new choreography and reached where reaching had not made sense before. Lila grew taller by a whisper. She could stand higher without fear, not because the drop was kind, but because she had learned which part of herself to listen with. Sometimes her father took her out in a jumreisa when the water behaved. The mountain from the water looked less like authority and more like a companion. Lila dragged her fingers in the cold blue and felt the sea take one fingerprint, then another, not to own them, but to carry them to the shore and write for a moment her name in bubbles. No one but she and the sky could read. One windless evening, when the sun loosened its bridle and went slow over the lip of the world. The mountain made its bow. No one saw it in the theatrical way. There was no sudden groan, no break, no scandal of stone. But if you had been watching with the attention that keeps bells honest, you would have noticed a slope yield by the thickness of a breath. You would have seen the silhouette tilt less than a sigh, and then stand. Down below, the sea caught that small mercy and answered with a run of waves so tender, gulls paused to listen. Lila, on the stone table step, felt it in the bones behind her ears, the place the body keeps news it cannot explain. She closed her eyes. "Thank you." She told both without deciding which she meant. From then on, the mountain carried itself with a new ease. It did not shrink. It did not brag. It simply included in its posture the possibility that refusing is not the only way to be strong. The sea continued its rehearsals of return. Storms still came as they do. Edges still fell away in the night as they must. But the village sensed a different conversation in the wind that stitched cliff to horizon. We are not at war. We are practicing together how to remain. If tonight your mind is all cliff and your heart all tide, one insisting on keeping, one insisting on moving, you might sit between them the way Lila sat back against old stone eyes on traveling blue. You might feel where some ledge in you has sheared away and not decide too quickly whether this is loss or room. You might let one part of you bow a fraction and another part answer with gentleness. Sleep is just such a bow. The thought's hard edge yielding to the sea of being. The sea promising to return you in the morning with softer corners. Lie down as the mountain lies down inside itself. When honest, unafraid to be touched by time. Breathe as the sea breathes out, and in reaching and returning 1,000 small bows to the night. Let the argument end, because it has served you, and let the conversation begin, because it will keep you. And when dawn comes quietly over the ridge, may you rise, not to defend your edges, but to share your view, steady as rock and fluid as water, a little wiser, for having learned that humility is not a lowering, but a joining the mountain and the sea, recognizing each other in you, and you recognizing a calm so deep it can afford to move. Story 10. The light beyond the window. In a narrow apartment where the city stacked its evenings like books on a crowded shelf, there lived a woman named Elin, who had placed a chair beside her window and called it Wisdom. The chair was not old enough to creak, but it respected the job. Every night, After washing the small plate and the single glass, after answering the last message that needed no real answer, she would sit there, back quiet, hands folded, the way water folds around a stone, and look out. Beyond the glass, the avenue kept performing its reliable play, buses, sighing, a bicycle, humming through its private summer, a neon sign, blinking toward patience, a man in a coat rehearsing a sentence only he would hear. Elin trusted the window, the way some people trust a clock, as a place where time behaves. At first, she watched to dissolve. She wanted the day to unfasten its last buttons without her help. The window obliged. It showed her the sky bruising toward night, and then healing into velvet. It showed her strangers tenderly refusing to be her story. It showed her the moon's difficult mercy, how it rose for everyone and promised nothing. When fatigue came, it did not ask for credentials. It sat at her feet like a dog who knows where home is. She slept better near the window. She slept sometimes with the curtain open so that night could stand by the bed and be a friend whose only job was to stay. Then winter arrived and placed frost like handwriting along the edges of the glass, and Elin's watching became more than relief. It became study. The window, with its simple geometry, taught her scales, how to move her attention up and down the day without injury, how to hold a note and then let it go without apologizing to silence. She began to notice the small orchestrations. No one conducts the red scarf that always appeared 2 minutes after the street lamp turned on, the sparrow who checked the sill at dawn as if it owned the deed, the old couple who walked arm in arm only on Tuesdays and stood under her window to share half an orange winter scent opened by bare hands. These were not miracles. They were practice life, proving itself in small cursive. Some nights, though, a ache unfurled behind her ribs, not sharp, not dramatic, but persistent, like a polite knock at a door that pretends not to be home. She had read too many books about calm and collected too many phrases that described stillness as if it were an object you could bring to the counter. She had sat beneath pine groves and beside soft rivers in temples where bells learned to confess on cliffs that negotiated with fog. She had drifted once on a small boat and discovered how much work it is to stop working. Still, the ache. It spoke in questions that never learned to stand upright. What will happen to me when the window is dark? Where is peace when there is nothing left to look at? One snow-bright evening. The ache arrived without ceremony and took the better chair. Elin stood at the sink longer than necessary, scrubbing a plate that was already clean, as if heat could be a plan. In the window, she saw her reflection superimposed on the street, the ghost of her face floating in traffic. She turned the lamp off to erase the ghost, and only made the city brighter. She turned the lamp on again, so the city would fade, and her face would return. She did this several times until she laughed soft, a little embarrassed, and sat down. "Teach me," she said to the window, because she had said that to many things, to the river that had once forgotten how to move and taught her that a stillness can be a current, to an old monk who had poured tea past the rim and taught her that empty is a kind of room, to a cloud that had held a sleeping bird and taught her that rest is a location you carry, to a candle who had bowed to wind and taught her that trembling is not the opposite of light, to a broken bell that had taught her how two tones can braid one honesty, to a lotus that rose clean from a faithful mud, to a tree that had dreamed of spring without scolding winter, to a fisherman who stopped casting nets and learned to float, to a mountain that had bowed a fraction and learned a gentler strength. "Teach me," she said, again not expecting an answer in any language you can underline. The window, being a window, said nothing, but it performed its craft. A taxi paused below and wrote a yellow stripe across the ceiling. A neighbor's laughter, small and contagious, rose like bakery air. Somewhere, a dog barked with the authority of a small god. Elin breathed with the street and almost forgot to try. When her eyelids grew heavy, the city dimmed, as if dimming were a courtesy it had learned just for her. She slept in the chair head against the frame and dreamed that the glass hinged inward like a book cover, and she stepped through, not onto the avenue, but into a room with no roof and a floor made of both tile and river, a place where the furniture had the good manners to be sky. In the dream, a window stood across from her, and beyond that window was her apartment, the chair, the sink, the little sofa patient as a dog. Her own life was on the other side of glass. She lifted a hand to knock and recognized by how the knuckles felt that she had been knocking from both sides for years. Behind her, someone poured tea and stopped before the rim. To her left, a bell rang with two voices and did not apologize. To her right, a candle leaned, then stood, then leaned again, confessing grace. A bird slept in the rafters, where rafters were made of cloud. A lotus shone far below, unaffected by the necessary dark that held its roots. The sea arrived without water and a mountain bowed without falling. "Teach me," she said into the room, and the room turned slightly, as if offering its best angle. "You are looking through the room," said, without a mouth. "Try looking with." She woke with the sentence still warm. Morning had untied night and left it on the chair back like a coat. The window was a rectangle of simple weather. She went to make coffee and found herself setting the cup down before it was full. She smiled. She stood a while with her hand on the counter, not to steady herself, but to let the counter steady. When she returned to the chair, she did not sit. She stood at the glass and allowed her gaze to soften until edges were not the boss of meaning. The avenue came toward her and did not need to cross the glass to enter. A warmth rose, not dramatic, not a shout, not fireworks, but a steadying as familiar as someone tucking a blanket up to your chin. During the day, she carried the window with her on the train, where faces practiced being mirrors. In the elevator, where eye contact was an endangered bird. At work, where numbers auditioned for importance and were mostly hired. When irritation arrived, she noticed the pain it pressed against. When worry arrived, she noticed the smudge left by an old thought and wiped it without complaint. When tenderness arrived, unexpected, like a letter forwarded through several cities, and still managing to smell like home, she noticed nothing but tenderness. Weeks slipped past with the decency of water. One afternoon, the building lost power, and the window became honest glass, with honest gray, no humming neon to comfort, no traffic to distract. The ache saw an opportunity and returned with a stack of familiar arguments. Elin felt the old restlessness reach for the switch that wasn't there, and laughed again, less embarrassed this time. She turned her back to the window and looked into the room. The small bookshelf that had memorized the names of her fingers. The plant that had forgiven her most of the winter. The rug worn in the precise place where she always stood to tie her shoes. The walls that had kept her secrets without becoming a prison. She half closed her eyes, the way the monk had once done by a bell, and the room glowed a little, as if remembering its job was not to be perfect, but to be a bowl. It was strange, and also right. The light was behind her now, and yet the room was brighter, not because the sun had turned, but because attention had. Look with the dream had said, add. She tried. She softened the boundary between seeing and being seen. She let her chest be a window, and her breath, the curtain. The breeze knows how to move. A tenderness gathered in her sternum, not sentimental, not about anyone in particular. It was the kind of tenderness that a mountain might feel when it realizes the sea has been bowing all night. The kind a fisherman might feel when the boat refuses to capsize even under the weight of nothing. The kind a tree might feel under snow when sap rehearses a future it can't yet prove. She didn't stop using the window. She loved it more the way you love a teacher after you understand that graduation is not a betrayal. But she leaned on it less. She stopped arranging her day so that every pane could be held up to the glass for translation. Sometimes she sat in the kitchen with the fridge humming its small prayer and stared at the cupboards as if they too were miracles in a difficult language. Sometimes she closed her eyes on purpose and let the apartment become a country where seeing was not required to belong. One night, rain wrote its hurried cursive across the city. Elin turned the lamp off and sat in the dim. The window's surface caught the room as surely as it caught the street, a reflection of a reflection, learning to let go of being a mirror. She saw her face and the lamp's ghost and the plant's patient silhouette, and overlaying all of it, the red scarf moving through rain 2 floors below. Everything was inside everything. The ache when it tried to announce itself realized it had lost its stage. Without deciding to, she stood and pressed her palm to the glass, the way the abbot had once pressed his palm to bronze. The cold met her. Then the cold became less interested in being cold and more interested in being touch. A sentence rose that was not a sentence here. It repeated not with urgency, but with devotion. Here, 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 until time felt like a room with a window that was also a door. She turned away as an experiment and walked down the short hall. No window there, only the soft rectangle of her bed, the blanket the color of early wheat, the pillow forgiving the night, reluctant to use its voice. She lay down without permission from any book. The window did not suffer jealousy. It moved with her because, of course, it had never been in the wall. Sleep came the way a careful friend arrives early, but happy to wait in the kitchen making tea, not insisting you stop your story. When it finally sat beside her, it did not erase the day. It braided the day into a looser rope. She dreamed again of the room with no roof. This time, she didn't ask to be taught. She sat. She watched how the bell's 2 tones found a third place to rest. She watched the candle bow and stand. She watched the cloud arrange a pillow for a bird whose name she did not need to know. She watched a lotus open because it had been practicing closing. She watched a mountain lower itself by the width of a breath, while the sea lifted itself by the width of the same breath. It was not a show. It was the world being thorough. When she woke, the city was rinsed. Dawn was undecided and therefore generous. Elin sat up and did not go to the window. She stayed where she was and listened to light behave. She could feel, even with her eyes closed, the way the room remembered morning, how corners softened, how the plant lifted as if greeted, how the rug warmed under a sun it could not see. The light beyond the window had become a light within, not mystical, not theatrical, but practical as air. She got up, made coffee, and stopped before the rim. She carried the cup to the chair, and instead of looking out, she looked in at the way steam stitched itself to her breath, at the way her hands understood heat without argument, at the way her chest rose and fell like a small harbor in easy weather. Outside, the day opened its shop. The red scarf appeared on schedule and didn't need to be noticed. Someone somewhere rang a bell, and perhaps it wavered. She hoped so. Somewhere a candle met a draft and survived. Somewhere a fisherman tied a knot looser than last year and discovered he could still trust it. Somewhere a tree rehearsed its leaves. Somewhere a lotus rehearsed its roots. Somewhere a mountain remembered a bow it had not finished and finished it. Somewhere a river forgot again and then remembered again, which is how remembering works. In the apartment, Elin smiled at no one and felt held. If you are listening now, with your own window a few feet away or an ocean away, if you have been asking the glass to calm you by being other than you are, try this. Leave the curtain where it is. Turn toward the room. Let your breath be a simple lamp. Let your chest learn the grammar of here. You can still love the window. You can still let the city walk through you like a polite crowd. But the light you are looking for does not need glass. It does not ask the world to dim so you can sleep. It is the gentleness that spreads when you stop searching for gentleness. Lie back. Feel the mattress behave like a small old boat that has never failed a crossing. Listen for the bell that wavers. It will teach you how to hold two truths. If a draft slips under the door, let your flame lean and return. It will teach you balance. If a memory rises like silt through water, let it settle. Roots know what to do with such dark. If a mountain stands inside you, where you wish a sea would travel, let one bow and the other breathe. And if you need a window, close your eyes. Attention makes a pain and then dissolves it. The light beyond the window is already here, traveling the simple hallway of your breath, setting down its small luggage in your chest, turning on no lamp, asking for no proof. Only this, that you allow the room of yourself to be a room where morning is welcome and night is forgiven, and where you can sleep in peace. And when the time comes, rise in joy. And now, as the final words of the story fade away like a thin trail of smoke, you may notice your breath slowing down. The noise of the day has vanished. The racing thoughts in your mind have quieted. All that remains is the rhythm of your heartbeat and a soft stillness gently blooming within. The 10 stories we just shared, like 10 deep breaths, have carried us across a river that knew how to rest through the echo of a cracked bell, past a lotus blooming in the mud, a candle bowing to the wind, and even a mountain learning how to greet the ocean. Each story is a gentle reminder that peace is not somewhere far away. It is right here, in this very moment, where all you need to do is pause, listen, and let go. If right now your eyes are closing without effort, if your heart feels warm even though the night surrounds you, then this journey has come full circle. Let sleep carry you home, like waves guiding a boat, like the wind cradling a cloud, like an old friend welcoming you back. Thank you for staying with Sleep in Peace and Rise in Joy. Buddha, stories for calm mind. If you have found peace in these stories, please subscribe to the channel so we can meet again each night in this gentle light of stillness. Wishing you a deep, restful sleep, peace in every breath, and a smile in the morning from a soul that has truly rested.